This is TWiT.
This episode of Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. Your IT skills are outdated in about 18 months. Stay ahead of the curve and strengthen your IT expertise with affordable, certification-based learning that will launch or advance your career. Individuals use the code TWIT30 for 30% off a standard or premium individual IT Pro membership at go.acilearning.com/twit.
It's time for Rod Pyle.
It worked, but it worked very slowly to invoke Rod Pyle.
Sending those signals so far away to space to get in touch.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Rod Pyle is 12 billion miles away from the Earth, so it took 17 hours for me to get these these fabulous books. Interplanetary Robots, True Stories of Space Exploration, one of Rod's books. Amazing Stories of the Space Age, another one of Rod's books. Look at this one.
That's cool.
Blueprint for a Death Star.
That's definitely the title.
It's not the Death Star because we don't want George to get mad. It's a battle star.
That's a space station.
He's the editor-in-chief of Ad Astra Magazine, International Space Society. National Space Society. Not international. There's just this nation. And you'll get to talk in a bit, Rod. First, I have to tell you everything about the Pyle. And this is the book I'm not going to throw because it's going to kill somebody if I do.
It is.
The First on the Moon, the Apollo 11 50th Anniversary Experience. I love this book. So much that I bought two, one for my coffee table at home and one for the Pyle. Hello, Rod Pyle, spaceman.
Hello, sir. And, that Battlestar book was supposed to be how to build the Death Star. But just as we were getting ready to go to press, Disney bought the Star Wars franchise and the publisher went, uh-oh.
Don't want to mess with Disney.
We'll call it something else. Yeah.
Love Rod Pyle. Rod Pyle, most importantly, is host of This Week in Space with Tarek Malik on this same very network. And
sure.
I can bet that this week you'll be talking about Russia.
Oh, poor Russia. Yeah.
This is one where I'm trying not to go, woohoo!
You're trying not to gloat. I know.
So what happened?
Well, it's hard. And, being boomers, you and I, even though we were kind of near the tail end of it, I don't know about you. But
what happens if at the end of being a boomer?
Well, you end up having a little tweak of nationalism every time you hear one of these things. Because we grew up during
in the space race. Yeah.
So, the Soviet Union was going great guns in the 50s and 60s with space. 70s, they still did really well with space stations, but they had given up on the moon. And then they kept kind of a steady cadence up with the space stations for decades, and then eventually joined in with the International Space Station, of course.
Which is fine. When we were allies, cooperating, collaborating, great. But then Roscosmos became politicized.
Yes, very much so. And they've had a lot of problems. So towards the end of us using Soyuz to get up to the space station for our astronauts, because the shuttle wasn't flying anymore, they started having reliability problems with that previously very reliable crewed spacecraft. And for the last few years, I think their budget's at this point a couple $2 billion a year, a little more, not very much. And they're having a lot of problems. So Luna-25, which was going to be their first robotic landing on the moon since 1976, and they returned samples, small amount of samples, robotically, was supposed to land to the South Pole. This is going to be a big deal. They were just going to beat India by a few days, and they were going to go and, prospect hopefully for water. Sorry, there's a helicopter going over. For water ice on lunar pole. Now, this was not a rover. It was just a lander, but that was still the hope. Unfortunately...
Wait a minute. Here comes the Navy SEALs.
The Air Force here, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Unfortunately, apparently a couple of days ago, they did an orbital maneuver and it didn't go correctly, and it sent the spacecraft into an impact trajectory on the lunar surface, and bye-bye Luna-25. That said, India's Chandrayaan-3 and they've had an okay record there. They had one problem and one success. Boy, they're flying right around here. Thank you very much. Stormwatch, I guess. Chandrayaan's supposed to land on the 23rd or 24th, and that actually has a small rover and will do some prospecting. So when I say prospecting, I don't mean drilling.
Everybody is going to, is it the South Pole where the water is?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to speak up, Leo.
Is everybody going to the South Pole where the water is?
Yeah.
And even China is playing. In fact, Russia now is going to do a deal. Instead of working with us and the ESA, they're going to work with China to put something on the South Pole. And now we're going to see the politicization of space, I'm afraid.
Very much so. So in the interim, Russia does have 2 or 3 more landers planned, including a drill. So they're going to go try and drill for ice and see if they can find it in a couple of years, if it works. They're just, they had a lot of brain drain after the end of the Soviet Union and in the ensuing years because of low pay and bad working conditions and so forth, as I understand it. And, they're just not up to snuff anymore as far as the stuff is concerned.
Is there is there a loss to science from this crash?
Oh, I think so. Anything at the South Pole is new because we've never been there with anything. So that would have been very exciting. And certainly if the Indian landing occurs properly, that'll be very exciting because they're going to be able to drive around at least for one lunar day, a couple of weeks, and look for things. So we're really looking forward to that. But yeah, this was not a good ending to their attempt. And as you point out, they're now in this China-Russia alliance to build their own lunar base. So we have a plan to eventually have a crewed base, hopefully on the lunar South Pole.
This is straight out of the TV show Space Force.
Well, and For All Mankind, right?
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
In a more serious vein, For All Mankind covered this. Yeah.
And so, because of geopolitics, Russia and China decided to ally on this thing. And they're inviting other people to participate. So far, not many countries have signed up for that. On the American side, we have the Artemis Accords. Russia was invited, China was not. And that's an international cooperation to do work around the moon and on the lunar surface. And so far, 25 countries have signed up for that, including India just recently. So we could have competing lunar bases. And the question then becomes, if those bases succeed in being deployed, are they going to cooperate? Is it going to be like the Antarctic where you put politics aside and if somebody has an emergency, of course you help out, or are we going to have cold shoulders? And we just don't know at this point.
It's bad enough that we have this disease of nationalism on the planet Earth. It's really sad if we spread it to space, but I think it's probably inevitable, unfortunately.
Well, there's this divide in the space big think community about what the future is going to be like. And there's a fair number of people who think it's going to be very Star Trek-like and we're all going to get along and somehow we're going to leave our human impulses behind when we go into space and cooperate and everything is warm and fuzzy. But I think increasingly we realize it's probably going to be more like The Expanse where we're people, and we evolve from primates and we take all our prejudices to some extent and our animosity with us. It's actually been really surprising over the decades in spaceflight how well people have cooperated. I mean, the way that we were able to work with the Russians and others at the International Space Station was really quite extraordinary. And it went very well, even when things were falling apart on the ground with the invasion of Ukraine. Up there at the space station, it was fine. They were doing very well and they were putting it aside because there's kind of a brotherhood of spaceflight, I think, once you're actually one of the people up there. How that'll play out in the future is anybody's guess.
Roscosmos, which is the NASA of Russia, the press release, maybe it's a bad translation, said that Luna-25, quote, ceased to exist as a result of a collision with the lunar surface.
Right. That was a Google Translate.
I think that's a poor translation. Yeah. I hope it is.
Space.com said it was a Google. We do have another interesting story, which we covered on the podcast about a week ago. There's a little bit of shuffling going on at NASA because of budget cuts. They were not given the increase that they hoped for 2024. So they're looking for places to trim costs. One of them is the New Horizons program, which you probably remember flew past Pluto, first spacecraft to ever do that in 2015, and flew past a Kuiper Belt object way out beyond the rim of the solar system in 2019 called Arrokoth, or some people knew it as Ultima Thule earlier on. And that spacecraft has been proceeding on just fine since then under the leadership of a gent named Alan Stern, who got very famous around that. And at this point, it costs about the same to run that spacecraft out in the Kuiper Belt as it costs to run the Voyagers in interstellar space. So about $7-8 million a year. That's with a million, not with a B, but with an M. And that's with a very small crew behind the operations and a very simple operational setup. They're not using the big Mission Control Center at JPL. Unfortunately, that's one of the places they're looking to cut. So they're trying to cut that budget about in half, not quite shut the spacecraft all the way down, but just have it kind of look around and say, oh, there's this many particles in the Kuiper Belt in my immediate area. Alan Stern, of course, wants to keep the mission running because he's got enough fuel and stuff aboard to do at least one, maybe two more encounters and run this thing out possibly till 2050. So there's a bit of a citizens campaign going on to try and bring some pressure to bear because we're talking about a difference of about $3.5 million. This is a rounding error. This is a lunch error for a federal agency, a lunch budget, I mean. So there's a campaign going on over at change.org. Do you mind if I give you the URL?
Please.
Oh, both of you at the same time.
I was ready to type it in.
Sirs. It's go.nss.org/new-horizons. And we've got a petition there.
I'm curious to ask, too, when it comes
Sure.
to this kind of thing, where does most of that money go to? Is it paying the people who are on the ground who are monitoring it regularly? Is it the power that we're putting into it because like the thing is fueled, it's already been built, it's out there. So
Right.
what are the costs associated with this at this point?
That's a really excellent question. It's been about $1 billion with a B to get it there and operate up till now. So the remaining costs, a little bit of it's in infrastructure, but most of it's for the people.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, it's a fairly small crew. And you have to pay for the space that you're using and keep the equipment running on the ground and so forth. But most of it's for payroll. So these are American jobs. So that's
Has
not a bad
NASA
thing.
decided that there's no more science to be gained from New Horizons?
No, because anything that's operating out there, especially in deep space like this, there's always science. Because other than the Voyagers, we've never been there. And let's bear in mind, the Voyagers are 46 years old. Half their instruments are shut off because they aged out. Their power is going down. We reached the point of halfway through the half-life of the plutonium fuel supply. So they're probably only really going to be viable for science for a handful of more years. And the instruments they're using were designed in the 60s and built in the 70s.
Right.
So New Horizons is out there with essentially brand new equipment operating with a very robust nuclear fuel supply. So it's a whole different level of science,
This is something NASA has to do all the time, though, is triage on their budget. They don't have enough money to do all the things that they want to do. And so some of the things have to be canceled. And
and they do. But, personally, I'd like to see a few million maybe carved out, again, million with a B, with an M, not a B, carved out of, SLS. And put here, or hey, let's take some money out of the F-35 program, which is hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, billions at this point, and put it there. But they don't ask me because they're smart.
Yeah. Well, maybe the petition will help. Change.org is hosting it. Save New Horizons, the Pluto flyby and Kuiper Belt exploration mission on its way to ultimate Thule. I hope it gets there, and I hope we can talk to it when it does. That seems only fair.
Yeah.
It's already spent $1 billion.
Exactly.
Why throw it away at this point?
Well, and that's really the sense. If it was going to cost another $1 billion to run it, I get it. But and we have another very expensive program, which I like, called Mars Sample Return. But as happens with these things, that's supposed to happen around 2030. But as happens, the costs have been ballooning to the point where it's going to be almost as much as the Webb at about $10 billion with a B. So, there are places to get a few $1 million. I think that's the way to look at it. Cut back on janitorial services or something.
Write your Congress critter, honestly. Because, that's a Cory Doctorow term. By the way, Cory and his co-author, Rebecca Giblin, will be our hosts on TWiT this afternoon. Let me ask about the storm. Are you in San Diego or LA today?
I'm in Long Beach. That's
Long
the
Beach.
Queen Mary back there.
Yeah.
And I came down to last night to double tie my lines and check for leaks and all that. And I'm just going to sit this one out down
You're
here.
going to lash yourself to the mast no matter what comes.
Well, you probably are more up on the news than I am, because I expect you have like banks of teletypes in your back room going, chunk, 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 printing out the news.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it's not going to be that bad. Mainly, I just have to be here to take care of leaks and look after wind damage. And I've got a couple of friends with boats that can't be here, so I'm going to be looking after their stuff.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't really hit yet. Are you guys getting rain up there yet?
No. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to be in the path. We're talking about the hurricane that is headed towards Southern California. First time in a long time that Southern California's had a hurricane.
1939.
But it's slowly. I don't know what's going on with it. I'm not a meteorologist.
Yeah, my latest understanding is we might see just a sprinkling here. Oh, in fact, Burke is saying it is sprinkle.
It's sprinkling now. Wow.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just chatting with some folks down in San Diego a while ago, and it sounds like it's going through there pretty hard. But
yeah,
still,
Dr. Mom's in San Diego. She says they're getting some raining.
What I feel bad about is we get no news about what's happening to people down in Baja, and it has
hit Baja, and that is a beautiful area. And I feel, Los Cabos
and there's
Todos.
A lot of people living in substandard conditions down there. Tons of mudslides. It's fairly arid, so I'm very concerned about the folks down in Mexico.
I agree. It has made landfall in Baja, so.
Yeah, and it in Baja it's still hurricane force, right?
Yeah, although as always, when it hits land, it tends to lose some energy. So let's hope. Let's cross our fingers. And,
prayers for those folks.
Nature's angry, and we gotta appease Mother Nature.
I think nature's had it with us.
She's done. She says that's it. Let's just start over, do over.
There's still some arguing. I go on the online forums, as we all do, and still see some people saying, oh, they're going to say this is because of climate change. It's like, well, when something happens once every 100 years,
at what point,
very small average.
I'm just curious. At what point will you finally say, oh, yeah, maybe we did overpollute the environment?
Yeah, maybe a century and a half of putting all this stuff in the atmosphere wasn't a good idea.
At what point do you say, gosh, this could be related? I don't know.
I don't think
I'm crazy.
You ever do.
Yeah, maybe you never do.
Well, and, not to politicize it, but working up at JPL, for a few months a year, I chat with people up there, and I have yet to meet one scientist that questions whether or not this is due to man-made effects. And they're scared, because they see the data right as it comes off the satellites. They're very, very, very concerned about it, and really don't feel they have a voice. So
it's not good. Rod Pyle has a voice. He is our spaceman. Listen to This Week in Space every week. twit.tv/twists. What day and time do you do it?
We record Friday mornings, and it posts about 3:00 Pacific time on Friday, every Friday.
Do we stream the? No, we don't. So you have to wait. You can't, because we don't want anybody to hear the dad jokes ahead of time. You have to wait and listen on the.
What's really weird? I mean, I kind of threw that in just as a lark, but we're getting a moderate amount of fan mail, and at least 80% of it says, "Love the bad jokes." And that's the first time I've heard anybody say, "I love the bad jokes." So,
you found your people, Rod. Congratulations.
My tribe at last.
Stay safe.
All due to you.
Stay safe.
Thank you,
if
sir.
it gets crazy, get out of there, okay? You don't have to save the boat. Just get out of there.
Yeah, if it gets bad, I'm driving up to your house.
Yeah, please.
But I hear you have eros in every room.
Every room. I've got little plumes everywhere. Thank you, Rod. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.
Pyle,
Bye-bye.
Spaceman. We didn't play Space Force theme.
Oh.